Some mistakes carve themselves into memory, not because they are unforgivable, but because they reveal what we have been hiding from ourselves. This is a story about two people whose worlds collided in a single silent moment, and how that collision changed everything they thought they knew about dignity, power, and the fragile architecture of the human heart. Theodore Grant had mastered the art of distance. At 37, he lived inside a fortress of glass and steel, 50 floors above the chaos of Chicago, where the city lights looked more like data points than lives. He was the founder of Meridian Analytics, a company that had turned predictive algorithms into billions. People called him brilliant, ruthless, a genius who could forecast market crashes before economists even noticed the tremors. But Theodore had long ago stopped caring what people called him. He measured success in numbers, not names. His penthouse reflected this philosophy. Every surface was polished to mirror perfection. Every piece of furniture positioned with geometric precision. It was a space designed to impress investors, not to live in. Theodore rarely spent more than a few hours there each day, treating it more like an elegant hotel than a home. He preferred the emptiness. It asked nothing of him. Across the city, in a cramped studio apartment that smelled faintly of rice and old paint, lived Clara Reyes. She was 24, with dark eyes that held more exhaustion than someone her age should carry. 2 years ago, she had left her family in the Philippines, chasing the promise that America offered to those brave enough to reach for it. She had imagined herself becoming a nurse, saving lives, building something meaningful. Instead, she found herself scrubbing floors, washing windows, and moving through the lives of wealthy strangers like a shadow. The agency had placed her at Theodore Grant's penthouse 6 months ago. The pay was extraordinary, enough to send money home for her younger sister's tuition and her mother's medication. The rules were simple. Come early. Leave quietly. Never disturb Mr. Grant unless absolutely necessary. For 6 months, Clara had followed those rules perfectly. She had learned to anticipate his schedule, to clean around his presence without being noticed. She became an expert in invisibility. Theodore barely registered her existence. If someone had asked him to describe his housekeeper, he would have struggled to recall even the color of her hair. She was efficient. That was all that mattered. He had trained himself not to see people as individuals, only as functions. The driver who took him to meetings, the assistant who organized his calendar, the woman who kept his apartment pristine. They were all pieces of a machine that kept his life running smoothly. But machines, no matter how well designed, sometimes malfunction in unexpected ways. It happened on a Thursday evening in late September. Theodore had returned home earlier than usual, driven inside by a headache that hammered behind his eyes with relentless intensity. The office had been suffocating that day, filled with the voices of executives arguing over expansion strategies that bored him into numbness. All he wanted was silence and darkness. He entered the penthouse, loosening his tie as the door clicked shut behind him. The lights were dimmed just as he preferred. He moved through the living room toward his bedroom when he noticed a faint glow coming from the hallway that led to the service quarters. He frowned. The housekeeper should have finished hours ago. Theodore walked toward the light, intending to remind her about the schedule. Perhaps she had forgotten the time. Perhaps she was taking advantage of his absence to linger. These thoughts formed with cold efficiency as he approached the door at the end of the corridor. It was slightly open, just enough for light to spill into the hallway. He reached for the handle and pushed. The world froze. Clara stood in the center of the small room, her back to the door. She had just removed her work uniform, folding it with the same careful precision she brought to every task. She wore only a simple white slip, her shoulders bare, her hair falling loose down her back. The lamp beside her bed cast everything in soft amber light, making the moment feel strangely intimate, almost sacred. Theodore's breath caught, not from desire, but from the sudden, overwhelming awareness that he had intruded on something private, something human. In that fraction of a second, he saw not a function but a person, a young woman who existed beyond his carefully ordered world, who had vulnerabilities and boundaries and a life that mattered. Clara sensed him before she heard him. Some instinct made her turn, and when she saw Theodore standing in the doorway, her eyes went wide with shock. She gasped, her hands flying to cover herself, clutching the uniform against her chest. Her face flooded with color, a deep crimson that spread from her cheeks down her neck. "Sir, I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I didn't know you were home. Please, I'm sorry." The apology pierced through Theodore's shock. She was apologizing to him, when he was the one who had violated her space, her privacy, her dignity. The realization struck him with unexpected force. "No, I should," he began, but the words tangled in his throat. He took a step backward, his hand still gripping the doorframe. "I didn't mean to. I thought you had left, but Clara wasn't listening." She turned away from him, her shoulders hunched inward, making herself as small as possible. The shame radiated from her in waves so powerful that Theodore felt it like a physical thing pressing against his chest. He backed out of the doorway, pulling the door closed with a gentleness that surprised him. His heart hammered as he stood in the hallway, staring at the wooden surface as if it might offer some explanation for what had just happened. His hands were shaking. When had his hands ever shaken? Theodore walked back to his bedroom, but the silence there felt different now. Heavier, accusing. He sat on the edge of his bed, still wearing his suit, and tried to organize his thoughts the way he organized data. It was an accident. A simple mistake. She would understand. They would both forget about it and return to their professional arrangement. But even as he told himself these things, he knew they were lies. Because he could still see her face in his mind. The terror, the humiliation, the way she had apologized for existing in her own space. And beneath all of that, something else that made his stomach turn. The knowledge that she feared him. Not because he had done anything to hurt her, but because he could. Because in the hierarchy of their world, he held all the power and she held none. Theodore lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling where shadows moved like restless thoughts. Somewhere in this same apartment, Clara was probably still standing in that room, trying to calm her racing heart, wondering if she would lose her job, wondering what he would do. He had spent years building walls around himself, convincing himself that emotions were inefficient, that connection was a liability, but in one accidental moment those walls had cracked, and through the fissure, he glimpsed something he had been avoiding for far too long. His own humanity, and hers. The city hummed beyond his windows, indifferent to the silent crisis unfolding 50 floors above. Theodore closed his eyes, but sleep would not come. Instead, he heard the echo of her voice, small and frightened, saying those two devastating words, "I'm sorry." And for the first time in more years than he could remember, Theodore Grant felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him like gravity he could no longer escape. Morning came with the sound of rain against glass, a soft percussion that did nothing to ease the tension coiled in Theodore's chest. He had barely slept, his mind replaying that moment over and over like a film stuck on repeat. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Clara's face, the mixture of shock and shame that had transformed her features into something heartbreaking. He rose earlier than usual, showering in water too hot, as if he could wash away the guilt that clung to his skin. When he emerged, dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, he found the apartment already immaculate. Clara had come and gone like a ghost, leaving no trace except the faint scent of lemon cleaner and fresh coffee. A note sat beside the coffee maker, written in careful handwriting on plain white paper. "Mr. Grant, I have prepared your breakfast. I will return this afternoon to complete the weekly cleaning. Clara Reyes." The formality of it stung more than anger would have. She had retreated into professionalism, building walls between them with polite words and proper distance. Theodore folded the note and slipped it into his pocket, though he didn't know why. At the office, he found himself unable to concentrate. His assistant presented quarterly reports that should have fascinated him, but the numbers blurred together into meaningless patterns. During a video conference with investors in Tokyo, he realized he hadn't heard a single word they said. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in a small room filled with amber light and the echo of an apology that shouldn't have been given. By noon, he made a decision. He left the office without explanation, ignoring his assistant's confused questions, and drove home through rain that had turned the city gray and blurred. Clara was there when he arrived, kneeling beside the coffee table, polishing the glass surface with steady, practiced movements. She looked up as he entered, and he saw the fear flash across her face before she could hide it. "Mr. Grant," she said, rising quickly to her feet. "I wasn't expecting you until evening." "I know," he said, setting his briefcase down. "Clara, we need to talk about what happened." Her face went pale. "Sir, please. I understand if you want me to leave. I can have my things out by tonight." "The agency will send someone else." "What?" Theodore stared at her, genuinely confused. Why would I want you to leave? Because of last night, she whispered, her eyes fixed on the floor. Because I embarrassed you. Because I made you uncomfortable in your own home. The words hit him like a physical blow. She thought she was the problem. She had taken his mistake, his violation of her privacy, and somehow transformed it into her own failing. Clara, look at me, he said, his voice gentler than he knew it could be. She raised her eyes slowly, and he saw they were wet with unshed tears. You did nothing wrong, Theodore continued. Nothing. I'm the one who walked into your room without knocking. I invaded your privacy. I saw something I had no right to see. The fault is entirely mine. She blinked, confusion replacing the fear. But you're my employer. You have the right to go anywhere in your home. Not into your private space, he said firmly. Not without permission. What I did was wrong, and I'm sorry. Truly sorry. The apology seemed to startle her more than anything else. She stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. As if the concept of a man like him apologizing to a woman like her was too strange to process. You don't have to apologize to me, she finally said. Yes, I do. Theodore took a step closer, then stopped, careful to maintain distance. I've been thinking about it all night. About what that moment must have felt like for you. The fear, the humiliation, and I realize something that shames me even more. What? She asked quietly. That I've been treating you like furniture for 6 months, like something that exists to serve a function, not like a person with thoughts and feelings and dignity. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture uncharacteristically uncertain. I don't even know anything about you. Where you're from. What you dream about. What brought you here. Clara's expression softened slightly, though wariness still lingered in her eyes. Why would you want to know those things? Because you're a person, he said simply. And I've forgotten what that means. I've spent so long turning everything into data and transactions that I've lost the ability to see human beings. But last night when I saw the look on your face, something broke inside me. I can't unsee it now. I can't go back to pretending you're invisible. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting together nervously. I'm from Manila, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I came here 2 years ago to study nursing, but my father got sick and the medical bills were too much. I had to drop out and work to help my family. My sister is 16. She wants to be a teacher. My mother has diabetes. That's why I need this job, Mr. Grant. That's why I can't afford to lose it. The vulnerability in her words made Theodore's chest tighten. You're not going to lose it, he said. I promise you that. Unless you want to leave. I don't want to leave, she admitted. But I don't know how to work here anymore. How to be in the same space as you without feeling that shame again. Theodore understood. He had shattered something between them. Something that couldn't be easily repaired. Trust, maybe, or the comfortable anonymity that had allowed them both to exist without truly seeing each other. Then let's start over, he suggested. Not as employer and employee, or at least not only that. As two people sharing the same space. You deserve to feel safe here, Clara. You deserve to be treated with respect. She studied his face, searching for deception or ulterior motives, but what she found instead seemed to surprise her. Sincerity. Remorse. A genuine desire to make things right. Okay, she said softly. We can try. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. A fragile bridge stretched across the distance between their worlds, built from honesty and the tentative hope that understanding might be possible. That evening, Theodore did something he had never done before. He sat in the kitchen while Clara prepared dinner, not to supervise but simply to be present. They didn't talk much at first, the silence still awkward and uncertain. But eventually she asked him about his work, and he found himself explaining it in simple terms, stripped of jargon and arrogance. And when she laughed at something he said, a genuine sound of amusement, Theodore felt something shift inside him. Something that had been frozen for years beginning to thaw. He realized he was tired of living in a fortress, tired of the loneliness that came with power and perfection, tired of being a machine instead of a man. Clara Reyes, with her quiet strength and guarded kindness, had reminded him of something essential. That being seen, truly seen, was both terrifying and necessary. That vulnerability wasn't weakness. That connection, however fragile, was worth the risk. As she left that night, she turned at the door and offered him a small smile. Good night, Mr. Grant. Theodore, he said. You can call me Theodore. She hesitated, then nodded. Good night, Theodore. When the door closed behind her, the apartment didn't feel quite as empty as before. The weeks that followed brought changes so subtle that at first, neither Theodore nor Clara could name them. But slowly, like ice melting under spring sun, the rigid boundaries between them began to soften. Theodore started coming home earlier, no longer finding excuses to stay late at the office. He discovered he actually enjoyed the quiet rhythm of the apartment when Clara was there, the sound of her humming while she worked, the way she arranged fresh flowers on the dining table every Monday. Once he asked her where she learned to create such beautiful arrangements, and she smiled shyly and said her grandmother had taught her, back when their family still had a garden. That simple exchange opened a door. Soon they were sharing small pieces of their stories. Clara told him about her sister's dream of teaching literature, about her mother's famous adobo recipe, about the Manila streets she missed during the rainy season. Theodore found himself talking about things he had buried years ago, about his younger brother who had died in a car accident, about how building his company had been a way to escape grief, about the loneliness that success had carved into his life. I thought having everything would make me happy, he admitted one evening, sitting at the kitchen counter while she chopped vegetables for soup. But it turns out everything is just another word for nothing. Clara paused, looking at him with those dark eyes that seemed to understand more than they should. My grandmother used to say that a house full of things is still empty if there's no one to share them with. She sounds wise. She was, Clara said softly. She died the year before I came here. I think about her every day. Theodore watched as she returned to her work, her movements graceful and purposeful. He noticed things he had never seen before. The small scar on her wrist from a childhood accident, the way she bit her lip when concentrating, the quiet strength in her shoulders that came from carrying burdens too heavy for someone so young. He began to realize what was happening, though he tried to deny it at first. This wasn't just respect or friendship forming between them. It was something deeper, more complicated. Something that scared him because it couldn't be controlled or predicted by algorithms. Clara felt it too, though she fought against it harder than he did. She reminded herself daily of the impossible distance between their worlds. He was a billionaire who shaped markets with decisions. She was a housekeeper who sent most of her paycheck home to keep her family afloat. Stories like theirs didn't have happy endings. They had consequences. But the heart she was learning doesn't respect logic or social hierarchies. It simply feels what it feels regardless of the cost. One Saturday afternoon, Theodore found Clara on the balcony, staring at the city with tears streaming down her face. She was holding her phone, and even from a distance he could see her hands shaking. Clara? He approached carefully as if she might startle and fly away. What's wrong? She tried to wipe her tears, embarrassed to be caught in such vulnerability. It's nothing. I'm sorry. I'll finish the cleaning. Forget the cleaning, he said gently. Tell me what happened. She hesitated, then the words spilled out in a rush. My sister failed her entrance exam for university. She was so close, but she didn't make the cutoff by 3 points. 3 points, Theodore. And now she's saying she'll quit school and come work here to help the family. But she's so smart, so talented. If she gives up now, she'll never get another chance. The pain in her voice broke something open in Theodore. He had spent years insulating himself from other people's problems, convincing himself that their struggles weren't his responsibility. But looking at Clara's tears, he couldn't maintain that distance anymore. What if she could take the exam again? He asked. She can, but not until next year. And we can't afford a tutor to help her improve her scores. The good ones charge more than I make in 2 months. Theodore pulled out his phone, made a quick calculation, then looked at Clara with determination. What if I paid for it? The tutor, the exam fees, whatever she needs. Clara stared at him in shock. What? No, I couldn't accept that, and why not? Because it's too much. Because I couldn't ever pay you back. Because people would think She trailed off, the implication hanging between them. I don't care what people think, Theodore said firmly, and I'm not asking you to pay me back. Consider it a gift, an investment in someone's future. But why would you do this? She whispered, fresh tears forming in her eyes. He stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her dark eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Because you matter to me, Clara, your happiness matters. Your family's dreams matter. And because for the first time in years I want to use what I have to help someone, not just to accumulate more. She looked up at him, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of what had been growing in the spaces of their conversations, in the quiet evenings shared, in the way they had learned to see each other as whole, complex, valuable human beings. "I don't know what to say," Clara breathed. "Say you'll let me help." "Theodore." She paused, gathering courage. "I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of this," she said, gesturing between them. "Of what's happening. Of how I feel when you look at me like that. Because people like us, we don't get happy endings. The world doesn't work that way." Theodore reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently took her hand. "Maybe the world is wrong. Maybe we get to write our own ending." Clara's fingers trembled in his grasp, but she didn't pull away. "And what ending would you write?" she asked quietly. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face into something warm and alive. One where two people who accidentally found each other decide to keep finding each other every day. One where mistakes become beginnings instead of endings. One where we're brave enough to choose connection over fear. "That sounds like a fairy tale," she whispered. "Then let's live in a fairy tale," he said. "Even if it's just for today. Even if tomorrow brings complications. Let's choose this moment." Clara looked at their joined hands, at the impossible bridge they had built between their different worlds, and made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She squeezed his hand and smiled through her tears. "Okay," she said. "Let's choose this." Outside, the city continued its endless motion, indifferent to the small revolution happening 50 floors above. But inside that glass penthouse, two people who had learned to see past surfaces, past power, past the labels the world had given them, took their first real steps towards something neither had believed possible. Love built not on fantasy, but on the fragile, honest foundation of two people who had been brave enough to be seen, completely and without armor, and had chosen each other anyway. The ending they would write together was still uncertain, still complicated by reality and circumstance, but it was theirs and it was real and it was worth every risk. Because some mistakes, it turns out, are really just the beginning of everything beautiful.